Ruth Myers here. Thanks for coming. Wanted to talk for just a little while on something you'll hear about called the recovery model for mental health care. It applies basically to all kinds of different approaches to care. And it represents a departure from what used to constitute business as usual in the mental health field. I think as you hear a little bit about how this came about and see the results of it, you'll see how it may apply to the kind of supports and work we offer people every day as part of our work as direct support personnel. The recovery model, one of the names of this, there's many other names for the recovery model, originated in another country, but has been adapted and extensively discussed, published by the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, also called SAMHSA. In the beginning, this is the business as usual. In the beginning, if a person had a mental illness or a disability, developmental disability, experts, people with letters after their name were considered to be experts, examined the person. Experts huddled up and talked to each other. They made a treatment plan. They told the patient what to do, and if the patient did not follow instructions, then they were forced to follow instructions. Everyone knew in the business as usual era, everyone knew that the more letters you have after your name, the more valid your opinion. Everyone with schizophrenia either stays the same or gets worse. That was the conventional thinking at that time. Compliance with all treatment instructions was necessary. If people did not follow any part of their treatment plan, they weren't going to get well. A patient needed to be 100% committed to treatment. If you are working your treatment for 3 hours a day, 5 hours a day is better. It's important to give people a realistic view of their potential for recovery, which means if you have a condition that right now has a bad prognosis, the conventional thinking at that time was that we ought to tell you you have a bad prognosis. Friends and family tend to make things worse, or at best are a distraction. And spiritual matters have no place in healthcare. That's how medicine, particularly psychiatry, operated for many, many, many years. There was just one teeny tiny, itty bitty, minuscule problem with this approach to people with serious psychiatric, and as it turns out, pretty much any other kind of illness. This is Dr. Courtney Harding, one of my mentors. She was one of the very first people to publish studies asking people who succeeded how it was that they succeeded. And she decided to start with the people that were thought to have the worst possible prognosis. For many years until maybe even the 70s, people all knew, and I do air quotes there, knew that people with schizophrenia either stay the same or get worse. They knew, they believed anyway, that everybody with schizophrenia does poorly and never recovers. But what Courtney Harding and her colleagues did was called the Vermont longitudinal studies. And basically they studied the people that were the last people left in the institutions because they had not benefited from the psychotropic medications, the new ones. The first one was Thorazine, chlorpromazine, that helped clear the symptoms of hundreds of thousands of people with schizophrenia. Well, everybody that was in the facilities got a chance to take chlorpromazine, and many, many people benefited, but there was a group of people that didn't. They were felt to be the most seriously mentally ill. Eventually, however, the institutions closed, and most of these people did not adhere to outpatient psychiatric care. They didn't go to the clinics they were assigned to. They were lost to follow-up, and the assumption at that time was that they had all deteriorated and probably passed away. But Courtney and her team tracked them down, and what they discovered was that when they found them, the people were typically doing really well. A lot of those people that were thought to be the sickest of the sick had in fact completely recovered, were taking little or no medicine, and were living their lives. They had no further symptoms or signs of schizophrenia, even though they were not adhering to any treatment plan whatsoever. Obviously, that was revolutionary information, and people tried to dispute it, but their research procedures were absolutely 100% impeccable. There was just no way to question these conclusions. And they concluded that it was a myth that people with schizophrenia needed to be on drugs all their lives, and that there was really only a small percentage that needed medications indefinitely. So they decided, after they realized that 2/3 or more of people with serious mental illness, schizophrenia spectrum conditions, recover. Most of them don't do most of what they've been told to do by their mental health team. Those with serious mental illness and many other serious chronic medical problems have been similarly researched. And this is basically lots of research about a lot of people that are thought to have a terrible prognosis, very, very unlikely to get well and recover. And they've all now, in these many decades later, have been studied. Well, what about those people that were never supposed to do well that did? What helped them? And it turns out, not surprisingly, what they think helps is quite a bit different than what was thought to be the way to do things in the beginning. The most important factors in health and recovery were that somebody important to them believed in them. Somebody who was optimistic, loyal, hopeful, and never gave up. The treatment team is optimistic. They never gave up on me either. If I had a treatment team for my colitis or my heart problem or my this or my that, they were optimistic and they never gave up on me either. I have a good place to live. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it's safe and it's clean and I like it. And I got something interesting to do with my day. These were the most important factors universally reported by all the people that were not supposed to get well that did. Does this fly in the face a little bit of what people thought was the right thing to do? Oh my, yes. Oh my goodness. The optimism to start with. I don't know how this came about, but there was a really large percentage of doctors, and I think sometimes there still is, that thinks that if a person doesn't have much chance of recovery, they need to browbeat the individual with that information. Well, how does that help? Okay, I got it. This is going to be hard. I got it. I don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea, but it still does happen, doesn't it? And it's statistically proven to be unhelpful. When there is a family member or a close friend or colleague or somebody that seems to be having unrealistic hopes, that's the person we should be nurturing to be around the individual all the time. We shouldn't be dismissing the people that they have a very unrealistic idea of how well this person could do. Excellent. That's the person that needs to be around the most, the person who just absolutely believes, at least according to the evidence provided by the people who've done well that weren't supposed to. I think one of the hardest things for many caring people to realize, and it's not bad people that do these ineffective things, of course. These are people that desperately want to help. But it's very hard, I think, for people to kind of get the idea, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I'm very sorry for him, and I wish to lighten his burden by all possible means, except by getting off his back. It really turns out that those really life-altering, spend every minute of every day in recovery type treatment approaches are not as successful as you'd think. In certain conditions, it's a round-the-clock issue in terms of being under medical supervision. For example, somebody who's just had their bone marrow ablated in preparation for a bone marrow transplant. They need to be in a very specialized setting with specialized people around them. But that doesn't mean they should have to sit around and worry about their bone marrow. That's the time to get all kinds of other distraction and action going on that's still safe in terms of the person's medical needs, for example. And I think probably the other very, very important point, in the immortal words of Elizabeth Warren, is that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And this idea of incorporating the individual and the people they trust most as at least equal, if not more important members of the treatment team is newer than it should be in terms of standard medical practice. When people have developmental disabilities, the tendency to exclude them from the decision-making process is even more pronounced. People will make, and what I mean by that is professionals, will sometimes make the mistake of thinking that if a person has an intellectual disability, that means they are incapable of having an opinion. It's not the same thing, is it? You may not be able to understand every single detail, but you may have an overarching opinion about how you want your life to go. And explaining to somebody, if you don't do this, this will happen. If you do this, it'll hurt a lot, but it might fix everything. That's a message most people can understand, and people can expand on that to make a decision about what they want to do with their treatment. There are, and always will be, physicians, and they're not bad people. I'm not trying to indict them in any way. There are physicians that feel like that's just too much to ask of a sick person. And that's their justification of, this person's already suffering. Don't some people just want me to take over and take care of them? And I think that's true, that there are people like that, but they'll make it known. But to start out with the idea of engaging the person ends up with a better outcome. Ma's Diner, people with serious mental illness. This is another Courtney Harding project. There was this day program for people with schizophrenia. It was a very popular model of housing, not really housing, very popular model of daytime activities, where people with schizophrenia would all go to the same place and basically sit around, watch TV, play cards, and smoke. And if they needed meds administered, they'd get them. It was basically a way for people to kind of socialize, mostly with other people with the same mental health issues. And people tended to kind of stay the same there. They continued to have the same frequency of needing to go to the hospital. They tended to have the same frequency of getting sick with something else. And they tended to have pretty much the same seriousness of symptoms. It was kind of a holding pattern model of support. Well, in this one-day program, there's a tiny little building next door that had been a diner, where the diner closed. But it was a tiny little vacant building with all the equipment needed to create a diner. So the people that were in the day program of people with schizophrenia, a few of them said, hey, why don't we take over Ma's Diner? And everybody thought that was outrageous. What do you mean? What do you guys know about catering? What do you know about running a restaurant? Nothing. But it'll be more interesting than this. And then, of course, and this is a very protective stance, people are saying, people will be dealing with the public, they'll have to be dealing with food preparation. That's stressful. Should we be allowing people to be under that kind of stress when they've got schizophrenia, for goodness sake? You can get how people would go there in their mind. But what was the feature? What was the factor? Nobody was going to be forced to participate in Ma's Diner. Everybody wanted to. So, long story short, most of the people that were in that day program took over running Ma's Diner. They served breakfast and lunch. It was not a very elaborate menu. They had people cooking, they had people cleaning, they had people serving, and they ran Ma's Diner. Now, the other thing that shocked everybody was what happened with those individual people that had chosen to participate in Ma's Diner. Their seriousness of symptoms declined. They had fewer hospitalizations. They had fewer exacerbations of other illnesses. They ended up needing less psychotropic medication. They lived longer. That was one of the most important lessons from the Vermont longitudinal research and a whole lot of other employment research, was that if people are doing something they enjoy every day, that they've chosen to do, they get well faster and they're happier. So the idea that, work would be stressful, can we really ask that of people? And the answer is, no, you don't want to ask, you don't want to force, you don't want to place somebody. But if that person wants to work and they have something in mind, it's in their best interest to have the system organize what they're asking for. So, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration developed and continues to refine the recovery model of care for persons with serious mental illness and/or substance misuse conditions. That's the focus of SAMHSA, but as we read about other chronic conditions that can have a poor prognosis, the principles are pretty much the same, and a very similar set of research points and data and outcomes are seen for people with different kinds of other developmental, physical, intellectual, and other disabilities or potential disabilities. So they divide recovery into the following elements: health, home, purpose, and community. So what are the principles that are felt to contribute to these necessary factors of health, home, purpose, and community? In more detail than what I mentioned a couple minutes ago. Hope and optimism. Not as easy as it sounds to always be hopeful and optimistic. Turns out to be essential. Which is hopeful and optimistic? You could be compliant if you wanted to be. I think you're going to just feel better and better. I'm really looking forward to learning what helps you. Just take the meds and you'll be fine. There's quite a difference, isn't there? Which would you rather hear if you were struggling and suffering, right? I'd like to hear somebody say, I think you're going to do fine. I think you're going to do well. I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think you're going to do just fine. Or, I'm in your corner and I'm going to keep working like crazy to learn what helps you. I'm really excited about that. The others are just kind of giving people compliance orders, aren't they? They're almost coercive. And we all know what coercion does to people, and none of it's good. The next principle. The services that are successful, the most successful, are directed by the individual and determined by the individual's priorities. For example, which of these are self-directed plans? The primary care physician has said this person needs to lose 10 pounds. Or, this employer prefers, among all the options, to panhandle to get extra spending money. Or, the employer returns to live with an abuser because the abuser has money and they want more money. Well, it's pretty clear, isn't it? A doctor ordering somebody to do something is not a person-directed idea at all. If the individual is saying, Doc, could you give me some ideas for how to change my weight? Well, that's different, isn't it? People who are good at panhandling tend to keep wanting to do it. Is it safe? Nah. I don't like the idea of somebody I care about standing on the street, but if I've offered other options and this is the one they choose, it's not my life, right? And if a person feels like the only way they can get enough money to have a good lifestyle is to go be with somebody who hurts them, there's a coercion factor there that really takes that out of the realm of self-directed and self-determined. That person does not feel like they have options that they can control and instead has to submit to abuse. So, self-directed may not be what other people would choose, but has a higher likelihood of being helpful. Third principle, many pathways. Each person follows their own unique path. Recovery is not linear. If a person has a hard day or a setback, that doesn't mean we're done, doesn't mean we failed. It just means the illness got the best of them that day. We need to keep pushing forward. This shouldn't discourage the person or their circle. If a person has a tough day or a setback or slides back into a habit that they really wanted to get rid of. What are some useful ways to manage a clinical change? If the person misuses their prescribed medications, they should be fired from the clinic. Which, by the way, is standard practice, unfortunately, in a lot of clinics these days, isn't it? If the person trashes their house, they should be required to help clean it up. The person becomes aggressive during a flashback. The DSPs keep the person safe during the aggression, then take them for their favorite dinner afterwards. Which one of these is a person-centered, recovery-oriented approach? It's the last one, isn't it? And you can see a certain cadre of very inexperienced behaviorists going, "What? You're reinforcing bad behavior by taking a person out to dinner afterwards?" But it's not a matter of coercion or leveraging or programming. It's a matter of a person just got sick, and we need to nurture them back to health. Now, for the people that will not benefit from that kind of an approach, we'll know fairly promptly that that's the case. But if we lead with this, we establish a foundation of caring and nurturing. This business of if the person trashes their home, they have to help clean it up. Some people call that natural consequences. Well, that's a bunch of, what's that technical term? Garbage, crap, nonsense. We don't punish people if they break something during a seizure. We don't punish people if they break something during a flashback or a panic attack or any other symptom of illness. And I kind of see where it came from, but unfortunately an awful lot of physicians' offices, particularly offices where they treat people with pain, have adopted a policy of terminating patients if they make a mistake with their medicines. And that's different than people who deliberately divert or misuse their medicines. You know, when I discovered that I had a patient who had 3 other doctors, and all 3 of us were treating him with the same controlled medicine, making sure that he had a triple supply. And then I found out that he was selling 2 out of 3 prescriptions and snorting the rest. That's a guy I stopped working with because it was not in his best interest. It was not healthy for him to be allowed to continue doing this with my help. That's different than a person who says, yeah, I took an extra pain pill. Shouldn't have done that, should have done this. That's a different story, isn't it? We should be allowed to implement some nuance. Next principle, holistic. This is the term that they use at SAMHSA. Mind, body, spirit, community. All of those factors are important. As each of those factors is enriched and encouraged, the outcome is better. And you'll hear me emphasizing it a lot. It's like, yeah, sometimes things sound fabulous. Let's do this. This sounds fabulous. But we must always look and see, yeah, but does it really help? We all know of many, many good ideas, and I put that in air quotes, good ideas that were perpetrated on people with developmental disabilities that turned out to be flat wrong, but it took months, years, or decades to dislodge them because people didn't look at the outcomes. If we're claiming this is going to help, we have to prove it before we ask people to believe it. One of those misconceptions that still refuses to die, for example, is the mental age idea. Maybe some of you have heard of this. The simple version of that is that if a person has a measured IQ of 50, which is thought to be about half of average, and that person is 20 years old, their mental age is supposed to be half. So if they are 20 years old and have an measured IQ of 50, that's supposed to predict that they will have a mental age of 10. Well, it's just not true, right? Let's look around at all the people we know who have IQs of 150. Are they all equally mature? Probably not, huh? And it turns out that it's other things that determine a person's maturity. Has nothing to do with measured IQ, and we've all known people, right, who've been through terrible things. They may have an IQ that's measured in 1 digit, but in many ways they're 1,000 years old, right? We know those people. We can't let ourselves be distracted by what sounded like a good idea, but did not hold up to database scrutiny. The next principle is that the team of expertise that participates in the person's recovery includes support from peers, allies, family members, staff members. When everybody is incorporated into the circle and the values of hope, optimism, person-centeredness, and self-determination are embedded in the activities of everybody involved. The next principle is relationships and social networks. that support recovery may be different than the networks the person arrived with. And that can be hard to compete with. It's very, very hard to compete with the universal goodwill and acceptance in the person's neighborhood bar. Now, they may be drinking a quart of tequila with those people every day of the week, but they are, all that physical destruction aside, they're having kind of a wonderful time. If we are to be offering a person incentive to let that go, it's really important to offer something better. Not, well, you've had all fun all this years with all these really fun people in the bar, and yeah, they are really fun people in the bar, and now we want you to go to complete social isolation, but you'll be sober. Culture matters. This was a big departure from sort of old style conventional psychiatric thinking. Traditions and beliefs are very important and must be incorporated. The big exception as regards to people with developmental disabilities is when people are coming from a culture that see disability as a punishment by God, or a culture of abuse. And this is in certain cultures, for example, and we have a couple of people that we support here at STEP, when they were discovered to have sensory differences or cognitive impairment, their family decided that the only useful thing they could do was be trafficked as sex slaves. And that's what their family did to them for years and years. That was a culturally determined belief, although I'd like to think that the best elements of that culture would never do that to anybody. But that's how it was framed and perpetrated on the particular individuals. Those are cultures, obviously, we are hoping that the person will not want to continue to embrace. Trauma must be addressed, and in other seminars, we talk in a lot more detail about addressing trauma. Recovery is based on respect of the individual and active opposition to discrimination, which is a little uncomfortable at times. When somebody's in the important doctor's office and the doctor's staff says some terribly bigoted thing about the person's disability, to actively stand up against that and to help the person actively stand up against that is kind of uncomfortable. But a few experiences in getting comfortable with doing that, in fact, contributes massively to people's recovery. So those are principles of Samsha's recovery model, and I think they're useful to review. Many of them, of course, are perfectly familiar. There's a lot more written on the Samsha website, and they also have links to references of similar outcomes and similar findings in helping people with other kinds of chronic illnesses that sometimes have a bad prognosis. There's so many ways that we can help mobilize to help a person recover, no matter what their original prognosis might be. Thank you so much for attending.